And welcome back, my friends, to another episode of Phil at the Movies. I am yours truly, Phil Walsh, and you're listening to show number 194 of this ongoing podcast that is, you guessed it, for the love of movies. And you may have noticed a little bit of a change with today's intro music. I am a big believer in shaking things up, that you can't keep the same tune, if you will, for a long period of time. I'm a big believer in constantly reinventing and shaking things up to keep things new and exciting. And here's a good opportunity. I wanted to actually highlight an artist where I got this song from. His name is Kevin MacLeod, and I don't know, just thought it seemed kind of a little different, but still in keeping with the theme of this being a movie show. So I do hope you enjoy the change of tune for the time being. On today's show, I want to talk with you about Wake Up Dead Man. Now, this has been one of my most anticipated films of the year. This is the third installment in the Knives Out trilogy. Well, really can't even call it a trilogy. It's the third film, but it's a standalone movie in every sense of the word, with the exception of the central character, Detective Benoit Blanc, played by Daniel Craig. But before I begin with my thoughts on this new whodunit mystery, let me first, of course, start by saying thank you, as always, for tuning in each and every Friday to the show. Greatly appreciate your support and friendship over these almost now 4 years. This would not be possible without you, the friends, you, the listeners of this show, and I am forever in your debt and grateful to each and every one of you who takes the time to be a part of this cinematic community and cinematic journey with me. Now, if you could be so kind to rate and review this podcast on Apple, as well as share it, it helps a great deal with the pesky algorithm and getting this podcast into more people's ears, and so we can continue to grow our cinematic community. Again, there's plenty of movies to discuss and not enough time in which to do it, but we're going to try one film at a time, one reel at a time. All right, I will stop before this becomes a pun-tastic show. But any event, guys, just thank you as always, and certainly looking now at the calendar, we are moving along. We are halfway through December, which means 2025 will soon be in the rear view mirror. 2026 is upon us, which means we will be getting one day closer to the release of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. As soon as the trailer drops, you can expect a reaction from me on this particular show. So look for a bonus episode in the next few weeks, because I am going to be devouring every scene, every little bit of this upcoming trailer for my most anticipated film of 2026. And if we're being really honest, it's my most anticipated film of the next couple of years. Period. Full stop. And yes, I should stop, because otherwise this will turn into a Christopher Nolan-centric podcast. Actually, that's not a bad idea. We'll put a pin in that and return to the subject for another day. But without any further ado, let's pull out our magnifying glasses, because we have a case to solve. Benoit Blanc is on the case. Here is my review for Wake Up Dead Man. It is a return to form for Rian Johnson, the writer and director of the series. In Wake Up Dead Man, he crafts the best Knives Out mystery since the original film. This new entry puts Benoit Blanc on his most intricate case yet, following and untangling a web of lies, deception, truth, and consequence, mixed with a subtext on religion that is frankly pertinent for our times. That has been the genius of this series. Each film, from Knives Out to Glass Onion to Wake Up Dead Man, tackles social mores of sorts, the institutional fabrics of our society. Nothing is left untouched. In the first film, the mystery revolves around family and old money. The second film deals with business and corruption. This third film, and arguably the most personal of the three, tackles that third rail of our society, religion. Here Johnson is putting Blanc up against more than a simple whodunit murder mystery, but on a full court examination and cross-examination on faith. The story centers on the death of a controversial priest with a cult of personality following. Josh Brolin breathes fire and brimstone that never seems far-fetched or out of step. His murder becomes a seemingly impossible crime when, after leaving his altar to step into a small room with no windows or doors, he ends up dead as a doornail. At the center of this plot involves a young priest with a troubled background and a good conscience, played by Josh O'Connor. As the parishioners become suspects, Blanc, a noted and proud heretic practicing his belief of logic and rationality, will walk a fine line between affirmation and confirmation as he works to piece together a crime that is built on lies but grounded in absolute faith, leading, in a rarity for these types of detective romps, a moment of true, compassionate grace. While I have loved this series, and particularly the character of Detective Benoit Blanc, played again smashingly here by Daniel Craig, I thought the second film was a letdown, in part because the mystery was a little more convoluted, and moreover, the characters felt like caricatures. The first film had a lively and yet dysfunctional family that felt real and vibrant. The second one felt like cardboard cutouts or characteristic tropes or cliches we would find in any mystery film. This third film, however, brings us back to the first film. It doesn't recapture the magic, if you will, of those performances. You think of Jamie Lee Curtis, Ana de Armas, for example, Chris Evans. But this one in particular has the best cast with the most grounded reality. Everybody here seems plausible and realistic. And I think also, too, there is a connection of sorts, whereas all the other characters, while they knew each other from a different point in their lives, were sort of brought together for one main event. In this film, it's all a bunch of parishioners and members of a local church. There's that tight-knit community bond that we saw in the first film. And on top of that, the cast is just outstanding. In addition to Craig as the ace detective and O'Connor as the good-natured priest, the film also has Kerry Washington, Andrew Scott, Kaylee Spaney, Thomas Hayden Church, and Glenn Close, just to name a few top performers. It's an incredible cast, and everybody has their moments. Even Jeffrey Wright, who plays a bishop, he doesn't have a huge role in the film, but he gets a number of good one-liners and digs at various points, and I just ate the whole thing up. But moreover than the cast and the setting, this one has kind of a gothic feel, whereas the first film felt very old school New England with old money and sort of the country farm atmosphere of Massachusetts or something like that. The second film took place on an island, very much a Agatha Christie and Then There Were None type setting. This one leans more into, I don't want to say Sherlock Holmes entirely, but there's more of that kind of, gothic cerebral atmosphere going on, which it has long been associated with the detective genre, the mystery subgenre, but it's on full display here, and Johnson is wise to lean into that atmosphere, particularly with the use of the religious subtext kind of running throughout the entire film. But moreover than the mystery, which of course is the central reason that we're all here for these kinds of films, the real story is one of discovery and ultimately rediscovery of purpose. Josh O'Connor, he is divine providence in this movie. Honest to God, he is an actor who continues to impress me again and again. And here he plays that priest who is sort of on the fringes and embraces his contrarian tendencies, whereas Josh Brolin's character is much more stern and old school, sort of thinking Old Testament, if you will, whereas O'Connor is much more of the opposite. He is much more about compassion and understanding, very much a New Testament kind of priest, if that makes sense. Again, far be it from me to call this a religious film. It frankly isn't, but it spotlights sort of the controversies and the contradictions and hypocrisy that run through organized religion, and that is on full display with the pairing of the two priests of Brolin and O'Connor, and it really does offer a study in contrast and kind of sets up why the church has gone astray in a lot of ways. And again, not to get too personal, but I was raised Catholic. Technically, I still am a Catholic, but I am not at all in agreement or, frankly, in following with the church. I consider myself much more of a practicing agnostic, if anything. I'm definitely more of the Benoit Blanc philosophy of question everything and lean more towards the side of rationality. But I love the way that Johnson is offering a commentary on the state of the Catholic Church at this point in time, and that is a perfect study vis-a-vis O'Connor's character and Brolin. One is more about compassion, one is more about fire and brimstone, and I think you can see just from that pairing where the church has sort of gone off in a different direction that may be even contrary to its own beliefs or teachings. And what I love, I think, perhaps most about this film is that by the end of the movie, Blanc is willing to shirk the detective spotlight, if you will, in order to turn it over to the man at the center of this, O'Connor's character. And again, that's why I really say O'Connor is almost a co-lead as opposed to a supporting performer here, because he has a great chemistry with Daniel Craig, but his character is at the heart of this. This is not a Detective Blanc story. This isn't him trying to rediscover his faith. This is about a priest trying to discover his purpose again, and sort of all of these events bringing him to a point and place where he realizes just what his purpose is and ultimately how he can be effective at what he does. And I like how he never has a moment where he just sort of throws in the towel and walks away. It really is a story about someone who is committed to the job that they're doing and to their beliefs and to their faith. And even when they're tested, they continue to go on and live to fight another day, if you will. And that's on full display at the very end of the film, once the twist has been revealed, once the killer has been brought to justice. Now, as I said before, all of these films have roasted particular subsects of our society and culture, and I think here Johnson particularly is addressing faith and kind of rebuilding what it means to have faith in one's purpose, have faith in oneself, in justice, in the law, in people, in your fellow community, and even in a higher power. And there's a moment at the end of the film where, again, it's not meant to be like, oh, look, there's God kind of a situation, but as Blanc is sort of unraveling the case and presenting all of his facts, the sunlight shines through the stained glass window, and it's sort of an aha moment for this proud heretic. Not in the sense where he's like all of a sudden found Jesus and found religion, but he realizes in that moment, to tie it back to my point about O'Connor and the rediscovery of his character's purpose, that's when Blanc says, yeah, I'm going to step aside and sort of let the faithful take over here and kind of let that grace intervene, which is something, again, you don't always get from these types of films. Usually it's a big rah-rah, catch the killer, put all the facts out, and then we call it a day. This is quite the opposite of the other two films, which at a minimum had very rousing and I wouldn't say over the top, but very exciting climaxes and resolutions. Whereas here, this is much more reflective and more of a commentary on the need to have understanding, the need to have grace. Again, putting into contrast the two different priests at the center of this film, whereas Brolin's character is all about anger and vengeance and a vindictive lesson and teachings, whereas O'Connor is constantly preaching love, compassion, and understanding. And I think ultimately we see that is what wins the day here, and ultimately is what Johnson is trying to get at, that's what the world needs. We need shouting. We don't need screaming at the top of our lungs. We don't need people shoving the Bible in our face and telling us what we're doing wrong or how we're behaving is wrong. We don't need judgmental scorn, but we need compassion. We need humility. We need understanding. And that's ultimately what this film arrives at. It's less about the mystery, and it is more about a revelation. And I found that to be extremely thought-provoking and surprising, because normally in these types of films, it's all about the aha moment and the big conclusion and then the killer being taken down in some spectacular way. That's not happening here. And that's something that is, I found, A, refreshing, but also B, ties in nicely with the film's themes. Now, in addition, there's all the clever zingers and sharp dialogue and characters and quirky personalities and potential suspects of what we would expect from a Knives Out mystery movie. But ultimately, it is a much deeper film that is willing to talk about faith and belief and the power of it, but also the need for grace and understanding. It's a wonderful marriage of those two themes that ultimately delivers a truly fine point that leaves you thinking long after the movie has ended, and not just about the mystery and the murder, but sort of the overall subjects that are kind of in the background that define this exquisite and eloquent whodunit. But there we go. There are my thoughts on Knives Out, Wake Up Dead Man. I would love 10 more of these movies. I have said it before. I hope they continue. I think Benoit Blanc is one of the great creations of the last 25 years. I think he's up there in terms of a fictional detective with the likes of Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, all of the great names that we would associate with the genre. But it's a combination of the sharp dialogue and the performance by Daniel Craig that really brings this detective to life. And if I could have one request for a future film, I hope we get to see this detective meet his Professor Moriarty. I would love to see Blanc squaring off against an arch rival of sorts, because I think it would be delicious and hilarious. And knowing Johnson, I'm sure he would be able to deliver on the yin and yang, two sides of the same coin debate that we have seen with Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, Batman and the Joker, Hannibal Lecter and Clarice Starling. But there we go. There are my thoughts on Wake Up Dead Man. I was fortunate enough, thankfully, thank God, I was able to see it on the big screen. It is now playing as of today on Netflix, but if you have a chance, an opportunity to go see this on the big screen, it's very difficult. I was honestly surprised when this local theater that I rarely go to, I actually haven't been to it for a couple years, but when I saw it flash up that they were having a screening for it, I'm like, well, I'm going to drop everything and try to make it. Luckily, I was able to see it. And for me, that, of course, is what it's all about. The theatrical experience is paramount. And I know a number of you have reached out, sent me messages about my thoughts on the all but certain acquisition of Warner Brothers by Netflix. And certainly I could do a whole episode just on that. I don't want to shortchange. I will say this. I am watching it very closely. I have seen a lot of statements put out there by the folks over at NickFlix about their desire to commit to the theatrical experience and all of that. I mean, how good is their word? Well, I mean, we just have to look at the record. I mean, trying to find Wake Up Dead Man, which is distributed by NickFlix, was a daunting task, to say the least. So I am quite leery when it comes to the thought of NickFlix sticking by the theatrical commitment, which has been a major part, frankly, the part of the Warner Brothers theatrical movie experience. I mean, they believe in that. They believe in movie theaters. So it's a little jarring for a company whose whole business model has been to get people to not go to the movie theaters, but to watch something at home. So I'm going to be watching it very closely. Again, I will always be a champion of the theatrical experience. I don't think anything compares to it. Whether you have the best home theater in the world, there is nothing like going to that place and sitting there in the dark for 2 hours and change and just being immersed in a movie and experience. So I will always be championing that. I will always stand on that side, as well as physical media, because I do not like the idea of a third party owning what it is that I want to watch. I want to have it in my hands, just as I want to go to the movie theater and sit down and watch something, not have to be streaming it at home and filled with disruptions and technical glitches that ultimately pop up. But I will stop there because, frankly, as you can probably tell by the passion in my voice, I have some thoughts on this whole thing. But I will certainly have more to say once everything sort of becomes clearer. Again, I think there is still a lot in flux. I've seen, there's been talks of a possible hostile takeover and bidding war. So, I mean, again, this is not a quote done deal. I mean, I think probably 99% is, but you never know. You never know at this point. There's certainly a lot of moving parts, and it's definitely got a lot of people's attention, to say the very least. But that I will keep my powder dry for the time being, and have more to say on a future episode. But that does it for me today, everybody. I want to thank you as always for tuning in. As I said in last week's episode, I think the week before that, if you haven't had your fill of me here, I've started another show, co-host actually, with my buddy Nick. We have combined our two podcasts for NickFlix and Phil at the Movies. We dropped our first episode last week, and we'll be doing another one before the end of the year, talking about Christmas movies, as well as reactions to some of the upcoming trailers, like The Odyssey, as well as, I'm sure, talking about this deal and merger with Warner Brothers and NickFlix. So lots of movie goings on. But again, I will leave that all in the show notes, and just know, as always, I am grateful to each and every one of you who takes the time to listen to this show each and every Friday. From the bottom of my heart, thank you, thank you, thank you. And on that note, everybody, go support your local theater, buy physical media, and yes, I'll be back next week where we will do this all over again for the love of bloody Christmas movies.